What are the damages of denial and ignorance of your problems? Denying and ignoring your problems is very common. It even seems to be a necessary option in some cases. For example, if you feel hopeless about a situation, it hurts to pay attention to it. But what if you are not actually that hopeless? What if there are some tiny but crucial things that can be changed? When you are in denial and ignorance, you miss those kinds of opportunities. So, today I'll talk about denial and ignorance as a clinical psychologist because it is a big problem for your life quality. So, if you have these behaviors, make sure you are aware of the facts that I explain in this video. Of course, you can also deny and ignore me. It's up to you. Denial and ignorance are defense mechanisms. But defend into what? They try to protect your personality and self-respect from psychological threats. You want to create a safe and trouble-free environment by denying and ignoring problems. You don't want those problems to upset you. This is a very common coping mechanism. Governments use that a lot. It especially happens in authoritarian, undemocratic governments. In these systems, denial and ignorance will usually be the first choice if problems are challenging to solve or have some conflict of interest. So how do they use denial and ignorance? By creating agendas, and the media concentrate on those agendas. But in those countries, if someone tries to raise awareness of the fundamental problems, they will be in trouble. Because this is a threat to denial and ignorance. We can see many examples in life, not just in politics. Ignoring the problems is actually relieving in the short term. Yes, it is healthier to ignore issues that we can't do anything about in some circumstances. However, we should know when and how to accept those problems. This, of course, requires a good level of awareness. I'll talk about what can be done instead of ignorance and denial later. Still, I mainly concentrate on the three harms of these coping mechanisms. When you deepen your understanding, it will be easier to motivate yourself not to misuse denial and ignorance. The first harm when you ignore or deny a problem is related to re-experiencing traumas. If you deny a problem, you don't do what is required. In that case, you can experience similar traumas in the future because you haven't processed those traumas correctly. If you haven't learned your lessons, then you must repeatedly study the same tasks. Let's say you have a credit card debt. You always experience financial pressures, which are micro-traumas. You ignore the problem when you say to yourself, "I'll pay it anyway, I don't want to bother myself, life is short." Suppose you continue spending problematically and get into a huge debt. In that case, the problem increases and will create bigger problems, bigger traumas. As a trauma psychotherapist, I can give many other examples about re-experiencing traumas. For instance, addictions are directly related to ignorance and denial. By the way, when I say addiction, don't just think of drug and alcohol addiction. Food, computer, social media, and many other addictions are related to re-experiencing similar traumas. The second harm of denial and ignorance is the false sense of control. As you ignore your problems, you may feel powerful and have a sense of control over those issues. Let me explain in an example. Assume you have a close one who ignores their health doesn't pay attention to signs of a possible disease. As a result, your close one can avoid going to a doctor because of a fear that they can be diagnosed with a severe disease. By avoiding seeing a doctor, they have a false sense of control, as if they are protecting themselves by this behavior. Another example can be the difficulty of accepting the death of a close one. Denial can be viewed as a natural part of the grief process. Since it is painful to accept the harsh truth, people can deny the death of a loved one psychologically for a short time. It feels like if I accept the loss, then I will lose everything completely. My memories, bond, everything will be gone. If this process gets longer, then the person experiences pathological grief. In pathological grief, people use denial and ignorance by avoiding some places that remind the lost one. For example, they don't visit the grave. This avoidance creates a false sense of control and worsens the grief process. The last but not least negative side effect of denial and ignorance is related to self-development. By denial and ignorance, your problems worsen and you don't improve yourself as you need. Every problem allows you to grow, and the first step is accepting the situation. If you don't accept the problem, then the growth process stops. It is like thinking conservatively as the only right way is our way and we need nothing to change. We often see this situation in relationships. You may ignore some of the problems in your relationship, suppress your feelings, and decrease your expectations. You act like this because you assume this is the only way not to fight, worsen the relationship, and leave. You may fear that if I don't ignore the problems, then things fall apart. However, there are mutual opportunities in these kinds of problems. For example, you both can have chances to repair your childhood wounds, develop communication skills, learn to set boundaries, give self-respect and love, etc. Of course, it is easy to say and difficult to take responsibility. It is easier to ignore your feelings, play the victim, blaming others, and the marriage institution. It is sad to think that I must accept living in this prison, and actually you don't have to accept that if you are aware of these processes, and find ways to take responsibility for self-development. While you are listening to me, you can tell me that, so what? Should I rebel against every problem? Should I always think about the problems? Of course not. My suggestion is to look at problems with awareness. Ideally, you should always know your emotions and needs and act accordingly. Thinking positively doesn't require denial and ignorance. My view of thinking positive is realistic thinking. Reality is the synthesis of both positive and negative. When you think positively, you actually think realistically. When you become a master realistic thinker, you can find the true source of motivation. The solution for denial and ignorance is this: change what you can, accept what you can't change, and be wise enough to distinguish the difference. I know it is damn hard to do that, but I can say from my personal and professional experience, it is possible. As long as you start to have the discomfort of denial and ignorance. Please feel free to share your opinions and experiences about this topic in the comment section. Take care. I really mean it. You can take care too by not denying or ignoring your problems.